Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Saturday, June the 13th. And welcome to our commentary. Let me begin by congratulating Team USA. Great game last night against Paraguay. You know, Paraguay is actually a pretty good team. I was talking to some South American friends today, and they were telling me they were quite impressed with the American team because Paraguay, you know, those teams in South America are pretty good. Now, I'm not saying that Paraguay ranks up there with Brazil and Argentina and Uruguay, some of the better teams, but they're a pretty good team. So for the U.S. to win that easily and that handedly, that's that's no small achievement. So congratulations to Team USA. I forgot. I'm not sure who they play next. I think it's Australia. But I think overall, so far, after a few days, the World Cup is going down quite well. And that's a good thing. I'm happy to see that. I'm happy that the World Cup is functioning well. I'm glad that different cities are doing different things, and I'm glad that everything is working out well. So congratulations to all of the teams and all the organizers, and of course to the fans who are paying some pretty outrageous ticket prices to go to these games. One good thing is that all the games are free on TV. You can watch them on Fox, their free channel, meaning their broadcast channel. And if you really want to practice your Spanish, you can also listen to Telemundo. They're carrying the games in Spanish. And, you know, one thing I will tell you that when you listen to the game in Spanish, the announcers are a lot more emotional. So if you want to have a little bit of fun and entertainment, listen to or watch the broadcast on Telemundo. It's really extremely interesting. But again, congratulations to Team USA and congratulations to everybody for doing a great job in this World Cup. But I want to begin with a very bad story. Really, I think when you talk about the news, a lot of times you talk about stories that are very depressing, and this one I think ranks up there among the most depressing stories that I've ever heard. And that's the story of these missing children. One of the consequences of opening the border is that many of these children went missing. Um, they got involved in kidnapping or trafficking, and in many cases, criminal elements were bringing them in. And it's really a terrible tragedy. The Trump administration has been slowly finding them. And I think they've already discovered like 100,000 of them, but there's a lot more missing. And to me, this is a story that needs more attention from the news media. And that's why I wrote this post today over at the American Thinker. You can check it out at americanthinker.com. The title of my post is "The Kids Are Not All Right," which is really the truth. I mean, these kids were used and abused in many cases. We hear some awful stories, and all of it because we didn't do the right thing on the border, which is to check people and why they were coming in and how they were coming in. And as a consequence, we have this depressing story of missing children. So there's a lot of things that you can hold the Biden administration accountable with respect to the border. And I think in a way, the American people have done so already by electing Trump and by supporting his immigration policies. But man, somebody has to be held accountable for this human disaster having to do with the kids. I don't know if maybe somebody in his cabinet, I forgot, what was that fellow's name, Alejandro, whatever his name was, who was, I think, Homeland Security, I think, or in charge of all this immigration stuff. Maybe he should be held accountable. Maybe he should be brought in before Congress and simply, they should ask him, hey, why did you allow this to happen? I'm fixing my neck up here. But how was this allowed to happen? How were all these kids allowed to come like this into the United States and fall into the hands of bad people? There have been in other times in American history, and there was one very famous case having to do with Cuban kids back in the early 60s. And that was a program where 14,000 Cuban kids came to the United States in the early days of communism in Cuba. And they came to the United States. They came without their families. They were literally put in a plane in Cuba and flown to Miami, where they were usually welcomed by a family member or The Catholic Church was involved in that project. And that was not a perfect project by any means. There were some problems with some kids. But at the same time, the overwhelming majority of kids were able to at least live a more normal life. They were certainly not being abused by criminal organizations as they were in this case. So I think this is a really black eye for the Biden administration and their open border policies. And I'm really hoping that somebody is held accountable here. Somebody needs to be. We're talking about, my gosh, 100,000 children, more, that were somehow lost on the border. How does that happen? Well, it shouldn't happen. And somebody needs to be held accountable for such a human disaster. Well, it appears that, at least if you follow President Trump, he said that there's going to be an Iran deal signed here very soon. And I hope so. Because I think an Iran deal would not only be a victory for President Trump politically, but more important than a victory for him, it would be a victory for the United States and for the West, because Iran has been a threat to the U.S. and to much of the West for the last 40 years. So if we can get a deal done, and this deal can control their nuclear activities, can control their financing of terrorist organizations, can have Iran focus on Iran, not having attacks on Israel and financing other organizations. If Iran can be Iran and go back to being the country that it once was, that would be great. And then as far as regime change, as I've mentioned before, that's really up to the Iranian people. And I'm perfectly confident that they will change their regime, but that should not be a part of our mission in this particular operation. That should come from within and let the Iranian people figure it out. I think they will, by the way. I think they will. I think they will overthrow these people and eventually come up with a much better government than what they've had there for the last 40 years or so. When you think about the Iran problem, this is a problem that goes back to the Carter administration. Now, I'm old enough to remember that. But if you remember, in the last year of the Carter administration, you had the hostages, you had the failed rescue. Iran, to a large extent, had a lot to do with why President Carter lost that very humiliating re-election back in 1980. So this is not a problem that began last week. This is a problem that has been going on for a long time. And if Trump can at least come to terms with it and nail it, I think it would be a huge victory for him, but more importantly for the United States of America. So let's keep our fingers crossed and let's hope that it all happens. Again, any deal you sign with Iran, you got to have to make sure you can check them and enforce whatever rule you have, because this is a country that has not been very good at keeping promises. So let's make sure that we have make sure that things are very clear and that the punishment is very clear if there are violations to the agreement. So let's hope for the best, and let's hope that something does indeed happen. I have a post coming out Sunday about something that happened here in the last 24 hours. The United States conducted a military operation in Venezuela, and we killed the leader of Tren de Aragua. Tren de Aragua is that organization that was declared a terrorist organization by President Trump roughly, I guess, about half a year ago. And we went into Venezuela, we found them, and we killed them. Now, we did so, by the way, and this is the good part, we did it with cooperation of the Venezuelan government. That's a good thing. I'm glad that we are working with them on these matters. But there are two very important messages that come out of this operation that we need to understand. The first one is that we're sending a very clear-cut message to any narco leader. It doesn't matter where they are, doesn't matter where they're hiding, that we can take them out. Because that's what we did in Venezuela by killing this guy. We went in there, I don't know exactly where he was, we found him, and we blew him up. That's a very important message that we're sending to some of the other narco leaders or narco people in other countries, whether it's Mexico or wherever they may be. But the other message that we're sending is a message to all of these new governments in Latin America, some of these right-center governments, like the one just elected in Peru, the one in Ecuador, the one in Costa Rica, the one hopefully very soon in Colombia next week, Paraguay, Bolivia, Chile, all these countries that have been electing right center candidates on the promise that they're going to tackle narco terrorism. We have now given them a tremendous boost because what we are showing them is that we can work with them to take out these people. And that's a big message. That's a big message for some of these younger democracies or smaller democracies that may not have the military means to accomplish these things. So I think what you're going to see here over the next 12 months or so with many of these new right center governments in Latin America, I think what you're going to see is a lot of joint operations, just like we just had in Venezuela. So I'm very happy that we're doing this because I think it's a big boost to democracy in Latin America, because one of the biggest threats to democracy in Latin America has been these chaotic narcos who have been engaging in terrible violence and disrupting a lot of these governments, like Ecuador, for example, a small country, but nevertheless an important country in South America. But let me leave you today with a little history. Martha Washington, the wife of our first president, George Washington, was born on this day in 1734. She passed away in 1802. They didn't call her First Lady back then. I'm not sure what they called her, but it wasn't like it is today, you know, with a First Lady and all of that. They didn't call them that back then. But nevertheless, she was our first lady, Martha Washington. And I've seen some images of her. And most of the images that I've seen are of an older Martha Washington, but I saw one. I saw one of a younger Martha Washington that was in the internet, where she was a very attractive young woman there in Virginia. So again, we don't have pictures or videos like we do now, but we do remember Martha Washington, our first lady, Martha Washington, married, of course, to George Washington. They're both buried, by the way, in Mount Vernon, there in Virginia, the Washington Ranch. Well, thank you for listening. Enjoy your weekend. We'll be back Sunday night with our friend George Rodriguez. Got a lot to get into with George, especially as we get into the campaign here in Texas. Thank you for listening. Enjoy your evening. And again, congratulations to Team USA. Bye-bye, everybody.